Somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, thousands of meters below the surface, a robotic submarine is gliding through total darkness, sweeping its sonar across canyons and ridges that no human eye has ever seen. For over a decade, this stretch of water has guarded one of the greatest mysteries in the history of aviation. And right now, in 2026, the most advanced search in that decade-long hunt has just wrapped up its latest and most targeted phase yet. Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what these drones found, what they didn't, and why the story of MH370 might finally be entering its final chapter. Let's go back to where it all began. March 8, 2014. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, a Boeing 777-200ER, lifted off from Kuala Lumpur just after midnight, bound for Beijing with 239 souls on board. Families, co-workers, children heading home. It was a flight so routine that nobody on the ground had any reason to think twice about it. Then, less than an hour into the journey, everything went silent. At 1:19 in the morning, the last voice transmission came through to air traffic control, a calm, almost mundane sign-off from a cockpit. Minutes later, the plane's transponder, the device that lets radar track an aircraft's identity and altitude, switched off. Not glitched, not failed, switched off deliberately, according to investigators who studied the data for years afterward. Civilian radar lost the plane completely, but military radar didn't. It picked up something chilling, an aircraft turning sharply westward, cutting back across the Malay Peninsula in a direction that made no sense for a flight to Beijing. For nearly an hour, that unexplained aircraft was tracked drifting further from its intended path, and then it slipped off military radar too, somewhere over the Andaman Sea. Here's the part that still gives investigators chills. Even after radar lost the plane, satellite equipment on board kept automatically shaking hands with a satellite operated by Inmarsat, sending faint hourly pings for almost 7 hours. The final one came in at 8:19 a.m., consistent with the moment the aircraft likely ran out of fuel. Whoever or whatever was controlling that plane, it flew on for hours after vanishing from every radar screen on Earth. What followed was, by every measure, the most expensive and complex search operation in aviation history. In the first days, rescue teams scoured the South China Sea, working off the plane's last known scheduled route. It made sense on paper, and it was completely wrong. Once analysts realized the aircraft had turned west, the entire search effort had to be scrapped and rebuilt from scratch, this time stretching across the Strait of Malacca and up into the Andaman Sea. 26 countries eventually joined the hunt. Dozens of aircraft, ships, and satellites combed an area that, at its peak, covered millions of square kilometers of open ocean, an area larger than some entire countries. And still nothing. By mid-March 2014, Malaysian officials stood in front of the world and delivered a gut punch of a revelation. Satellite data showed the plane had likely flown for hours after disappearing along one of two possible arcs, northwest towards Central Asia or southwest into the remote Indian Ocean. As investigators refined the data using increasingly sophisticated analysis of those satellite pings, the picture narrowed. The southern arc, the Indian Ocean, one of the most remote, hostile, and poorly mapped stretches of ocean on the planet. On March 24, 2014, Malaysian authorities made the announcement no family wanted to hear. Based on the satellite handshake data, MH370 was believed to have ended its flight in the southern Indian Ocean. There were no survivors. 4 grieving families waiting in hotel conference rooms in Beijing and Kuala Lumpur. The confirmation didn't come with a wreckage photo or a rescue update. For many, it came as a text message. It's hard to imagine a colder way to receive the worst news of your life. Once the surface search wound down without finding debris, the effort shifted underwater. And that's when the real technical nightmare began. This isn't like looking for a shipwreck in a harbor. The suspected crash zone sits along what searchers call the seventh arc, a curved corridor thousands of kilometers long, where depths plunge to 6,000 or even 7,000 meters, and the seafloor is a chaotic landscape of underwater volcanoes, sheer cliffs, and canyons that rival anything on dry land. Between 2014 and 2017, the Australian Transport Safety Bureau led an underwater mapping and search effort that, frankly revolutionized what we know about that patch of ocean. Specialized vessels towed sonar equipment and pinger locators across a priority zone of roughly 120,000 square kilometers at a cost north of $150 million. It was painstaking, meticulous work, and when it wrapped up in January 2017, the plane still hadn't been found. Then in July 2015, something did turn up, not in the search zone, but nearly 6,000 kilometers away, on the shores of Réunion Island. A barnacle-covered wing flap called a flaperon washed ashore, and lab analysis confirmed it belonged to MH370. It was the first physical proof of what everyone already suspected. The plane really had gone down at sea. Over the following months and years, more than 24 additional pieces of debris were recovered from beaches in Mozambique, Madagascar, South Africa, and Mauritius, each one drifting in from the currents in a pattern that, when modeled backward, pointed investigators right back toward that same brutal stretch of Southern Ocean. In 2018, a private marine robotics company called Ocean Infinity took its own shot, deploying a fleet of autonomous underwater vehicles to scan another 112,000 square kilometers. Once again, no wreckage. But the mission wasn't a total loss. The sonar data collected during that search filled in gaps in our understanding of the ocean floor that scientists are still using today, for everything from climate modeling to future search planning. For years after that, the official search sat dormant. But behind the scenes, the analysis never really stopped. Independent researchers kept refining flight path models using every scrap of available data, and by 2023 and 2024, a new theory had gained real traction, one built around a fairly obscure piece of amateur radio technology called WHISPER, short for Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. Originally, WHISPER was just a hobbyist tool, letting ham radio operators measure how far their signals traveled around the globe. But some researchers, most notably an aerospace engineer named Richard Godfrey, began arguing that a large aircraft passing through a radio signal's path could disturb it in a detectable way, and that hundreds of such anomalies lined up with MH370's likely route on the night it disappeared. It's a theory that remains genuinely contested inside the aviation and radio science communities. Some experts find it compelling. Others argue the signals are simply too weak and noisy to draw firm conclusions from. But it was compelling enough, combined with newly reprocessed satellite and drift data, to convince Malaysian authorities to greenlight one more search. That's where Ocean Infinity came back into the picture, this time under a no-find, no-fee agreement worth $70 million if, and only if, they locate the aircraft. And the tools they brought this time are a serious leap forward from anything used in the earlier searches. Their flagship vessel, the Armada 78-06, is a 78-meter ship built to launch a coordinated swarm of autonomous underwater vehicles rather than relying on a single towed sensor. These AUVs, built by the Norwegian company Kongsberg, can dive to depths of 6,000 meters and operate independently for up to 100 hours at a stretch, mapping the seafloor with side-scan sonar, synthetic aperture sonar for spotting small or buried objects, and multi-beam sonar that builds out three-dimensional terrain maps in real time. Compared to the single-sensor sweeps of a decade ago, it's the difference between searching with a flashlight and searching with a fleet of flashlights that talk to each other. So here's the honest, up-to-date picture, because this story deserves the truth rather than a manufactured cliffhanger. Ocean Infinity's renewed search targeted a roughly 15,000 square kilometer zone in the southern Indian Ocean, an area chosen specifically because parts of it had never been surveyed in any previous search. Operations ran in two windows, a short burst in late March 2025, and a longer stretch from the very end of December 2025 through January 23, 2026, when weather conditions in that part of the ocean are at their most survivable. Across those two phases, the team logged 28 operational days at sea and mapped approximately 7,571 square kilometers of seabed. Combined with everything Ocean Infinity has surveyed since first joining the hunt back in 2018, the company has now spent over 150 days at sea and mapped more than 140,000 square kilometers of ocean floor in total, an almost unimaginable scale of effort. And the result, as of Malaysia's official update in March 2026? No confirmed wreckage. Not yet. The Air Accident Investigation Bureau was direct about it. The search activities undertaken so far have not produced anything that confirms the aircraft's location. It's a gut punch, especially after all the renewed hope that came with the new technology and the whisper-informed search zone. But here's the twist that keeps this story from ending on total defeat. The Malaysian government didn't walk away. In mid-2026, officials approved a full one-year extension of the agreement with Ocean Infinity, pushing the search window through June 2027, with a further operational phase expected to run between November 2026 and April 2027, once the seasonal weather window opens up again. Ocean Infinity's CEO has publicly reaffirmed the company's commitment to the case even after this latest empty-handed phase, saying the team intends to keep working with the Malaysian government to return when conditions allow. In other words, this isn't over. It's a pause, not a conclusion. It's worth sitting with why this current effort still matters, even without a confirmed find yet. Every square kilometer that gets ruled out narrows the haystack. Every new sonar pass adds to a dataset that AI models and independent researchers are using to refine flight path predictions further. And unlike the searches of 2014 through 2018, this one is happening in an era where the underlying technology, autonomous drones that can operate for days without human intervention, sonar sharp enough to pick out debris fields buried under sediment, and machine learning models capable of cross-referencing satellite data, ocean drift patterns, and decades of oceanographic research, simply didn't exist in its current form even 5 years ago. There's also a very real financial and emotional calculation behind all of this. The no find, no fee structure means Malaysian taxpayers aren't funding another open-ended, budget-draining hunt. Ocean Infinity only gets paid if they succeed. That arrangement is part of why the government has been willing to keep extending the search rather than shutting it down entirely, the way it did after the first multi-year effort ended in 2017. Underneath all the sonar specs and search zone coordinates is something far more human. For the relatives of the 239 people who boarded that flight in 2014, this isn't an aviation mystery to be solved for closure's sake alone. It's the absence of an ending to a story that never got to finish. Groups representing the families have continued to push Malaysian authorities to keep searching, pointing out reasonably that the government risks nothing financially by doing so under the current agreement. Imagine, for a moment, going more than a decade without knowing what actually happened to someone you loved. No funeral with a body to mourn. No definitive answer to hand your children when they ask what happened to their grandfather, their mother, their sibling. Just an open question that gets reopened every time a headline promises a new lead, and closed again every time a search phase ends the way this most recent one did, extensively mapped, meticulously searched, and still empty-handed. As it stands today, the search isn't over. It's on pause until the next weather window opens, likely toward the end of 2026. When operations resume, the team will be working with an even more refined understanding of where not to look, which, in a search this vast, is nearly as valuable as knowing where to look. The remaining unsearched portion of that 15,000 square kilometer priority zone is still out there, waiting. Will the next phase finally be the one that ends this? Nobody can say for certain, not the researchers poring over whisper anomalies, not the engineers piloting autonomous drones through canyons 3 miles beneath the surface, and not the Malaysian officials who have to weigh hope against the brutal reality of searching one of the most remote places on Earth. But for the first time in years, there's a genuinely coordinated, well-funded, technologically serious effort back in motion. And that, on its own, is more progress than this case has seen in a long time. So maybe the ocean hasn't given up its secret just yet. But for the first time in a long while, it feels like it might be running out of places left to hide it. Thanks for watching. If this video helped you understand where things really stand with the MH370 search, consider liking, commenting, and subscribing for more deep dives into the world's most compelling unsolved